better daily, where we work hard in our minds, bodies, and our spirits to become 1% better every single day. Download the app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.live to catch the video version of these podcasts. Here's your host and my dad, Alex Van Houten.
What is up, Betterment family? This is Alex Van Houten in Better Daily Live. I'm super excited to hang out with you today on Friday. It's Flex Friday, and today we're going to be going through something that will help you on your exercise journey toward that 1% better every day. If you missed us last night in our Build a Better Menu workshop, you missed out, but it's recorded, so we'll be uploading that into the Better Daily community over the next couple hours, and I'll put out a post to make sure that you can go find that recording. But today, instead of going through an actual movement, I've had a lot of questions from the group in the past week or two about cardiovascular exercise. And so I wanted to take just a few minutes here to help you understand how cardiovascular exercise works in the different levels of cardiovascular exercise so that you can make your program a little more ninja. Good morning, Scott. Thanks for joining me, man. So cardio is commonly misunderstood because, as you've heard me say a whole bunch in this community, that exercise is far more than calories burned. Exercise is a stress that can bring out the best in our DNA. It can tell parts of us that are locked up inside. It can tell parts of us to become unlocked so that when our body builds itself anew again, which it does every single day, when our body is in the process of building itself anew, it builds back better. It builds back mitochondrial density, it builds back blood volume, it builds back denser bones, it builds back stronger muscles, right? So exercise is far more than calories burned. Now, that really matters because in the cardiovascular world, many people will say things like, what cardio burns the most calories? Or what cardio should I be doing? Or what cardio is the best cardio, right? And when I'm speaking with people, I hear this because they're thinking of it like a way to burn calories. I need to go move, I need to go sweat, I need to go breathe hard, I need to get my heart rate up so that I can burn off calories, so that I can, lose fat or whatever it is. And while you do use calories in cardiovascular exercise, it's important to understand that different forms of cardio create different adaptations. And this is just such a big subject all by itself. But for our purposes today, we're going to talk about base, moderate, and high-intensity cardio in just a really high-level view of what those do, right? So I'll start with high-intensity cardio, actually, because that's the thing that gets the most press, right? HIIT training, high-intensity interval training. That's when you do something really hard for about 30 seconds or so, and then you rest for 30 seconds to a minute, and then you do something really hard again, and then you repeat that 10 times. That's called high-intensity interval training. Right? It could be on an elliptical, it could be on a cycle bike, it could be running, you could even do it rucking up a hill, you put a backpack on and trudge up a hill really hard or carry some weights like Scott did yesterday and then walk back down, and that's your rest period, and then you do it again, right? So high-intensity interval training is a powerful form of training. It boosts growth hormone. You end up with a higher metabolic rate afterward. That's called excessive post-exercise oxygen consumption, EPOC. It's also really powerful for muscle growth, and it's a great way to teach your body how to burn carbohydrates well as a fuel source. So athletes do high-intensity interval training regularly. It's just a part of their training program, right? And so I like to think of this as fine-tuning the engine. If you had a car, you could fine-tune the engine. You could change a few things about, better spark plugs, for instance, or you could add a little higher quality fuel to the system, and you might get a little more work out of it. Not a whole bunch more work, but a little bit more work, right? So that's high-intensity interval training. Now, what a lot of fitness people won't tell you is that high-intensity interval training should make up a small percentage of your total cardiovascular work in a week if it's going to be sustainable. So they do these studies where HIIT training over 8 weeks is great for fat loss. And unfortunately, those studies only last about 8 to 12 weeks. What they won't tell you is that if you extend HIIT training for the long haul, you do 3 times a week of HIIT or 4 times a week of HIIT, even if it's only 10 to 20 minutes at a time, you do that for 12 weeks or longer, what's going to happen to you is you're going to end up injured and you're going to end up burnt out, because HIIT training takes a enormous amount of resources from your body to recover from. And the vast majority of people who do HIIT training aren't doing the other two forms of cardio, base training and moderate training, which we'll talk about in a second. And so you could think of it as trying to build a house on a terrible foundation. It was Jesus who said that the wise man builds his house on a rock and the foolish man builds his house on sand. And so if you're hearing the sound of my voice as I talk about HIIT training and cardio, don't be the foolish man. Don't be the guy, don't be the girl who tries to build the house, the HIIT house, on sand. And what does that mean? That means you're not cardiovascularly conditioned. You haven't done base training and moderate intensity training. And then HIIT training just throws your body for a loop. Your joints hate you. Your metabolic system hates you. You're craving carbohydrates and you lose fat for a little while, but you don't keep losing fat and you can't sustain that. And so that's not good, right? So HIIT training, very, very powerful form of cardiovascular exercise. It's much, much more powerful if you have a great base, and it'll boost your growth hormone, improve your body composition results, and teach your body how to use carbs as a fuel source. Good morning, KT. Good to see you. So I'm going to go to the other side of the spectrum to base training. Base training. If you Google this, this is called low intensity steady state training. LISS, L-I-S-S training. And this is the non-sexy version of cardio. The non-sexy version of cardio, meaning, it doesn't, like, nobody's taking pictures of, like, some sweaty fitness model who's like, you should do more low-intensity, steady-state training because it's great for you. Nobody's doing that. They're all about the HIIT, right? So low-intensity, steady-state training, this is the form of cardiovascular exercise. On a scale of 1 to 10, it should feel kind of like a 3 or a 4. You can have a great conversation with a good friend. You're working, but not super hard. You're getting a little sweat on. You're breathing, right? But you're not like dying. Like HIIT training feels like dying. If you're doing it right, that feels like dying. You're doing something that you can only hold for 30 seconds. You're like, oh, how much longer do I got? 5, 4. That's HIIT training. Base training's on the other end of the spectrum, right? If you go for a run and it's base training run, it's something you can think through. You can listen to music and enjoy. You can listen to a podcast or an audiobook and you can make sense of it, right? If you're going for a low intensity steady state bike ride or a low intensity steady state ruck, your heart rate is just up in those lower zones, those lower exercise zones. So you're working, but not super hard, 3 or 4. On a scale of 1 to 10. And they call it steady state training because most of the time you're maintaining this particular effort for a long period of time with very little variation, very little intervals, right? So you're not like running hard for a few minutes and then running easy for a few minutes. Low intensity steady state training is called base training because it is the foundation for cardiovascular work. In base training, your body goes through several adaptations that make you better at moving oxygen. Okay, so your lung capacity increases, your stroke volume, how hard your heart beats each time, increases, your blood volume increases, your mitochondrial density increases. So your body just gets really, really good at moving oxygen. Well, why is this so important for cardio, Alex? I'm glad you asked. It's called cardiovascular exercise because it's training your cardiovascular system. And if we were talking about a car, for instance, this system, this base training system, adapts your body's ability to use fuel. Oxygen's super important. Everybody take a breath with me. Breathe it in, that's oxygen, right? Breathe it out. What's coming out? Carbon dioxide and water. When you breathe, you are supplying oxygen to the combustion reaction of your body. You're supplying oxygen to your cells. And then when you breathe out, you're getting rid of the reaction components after the fact. What products? Geez, come on, Alex. It's just chemistry. Anyway, you can see that when you breathe on a mirror or something. You can see the water vapor and you can't really see carbon dioxide, but your plants love it, so breathe on them. Anyway, so your body needs to move oxygen, and fat cells require oxygen to release energy from them. So base training teaches our body how to use fat as a fuel source. So remember, HIIT, high intensity training, teaches our body how to use carbohydrates as a fuel source. It's very important, especially if you're consuming carbohydrates, that your body knows what to do with them so they don't need to be stored as fat. On the other side of the spectrum, if you would like to use fat as a fuel source, which you should, then your base training really matters to allow your body to use fat as a fuel source, to move oxygen well and tap into those fuel stores that you have just hanging out on you, right? And I'm not saying that because you're fat. I'm saying that all of us have a large amount of energy stored on us in the form of fat. My body fat percentage is somewhere between 6 and 8%, and I weigh 165 pounds. There's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat, which means at any given time I have somewhere between 60,000 and 90,000 calories of fat on my body right now. If I could tap into my fat as a fuel source and I keep my electrolytes up and stay hydrated, that means I could theoretically run for 40 hours without stopping and without eating anything. Now, I wouldn't do that. My joints would grind to dust. But all that to say, we have lots of fat on us. We have lots of fat stored up that we can use if we can just teach our body how to use it. So base training is super important. If you don't take anything else away from this brief video on this topic, we need a solid foundation for cardiovascular exercise. We need to train our base, and it's not hard to do so. It just takes some time. So if I'm spending 3 days a week engrossed in my cardiovascular exercise, at least one of those days, if not 2 of those days, needs to be base training. So the last type of cardiovascular training is right in the middle, and that's moderate intensity cardio. This is the halfway point between your base training and your high intensity training. Some folks call this tempo training. So if you're training for a race or something, this is your race pace. It's very hard, but you can hold it for much longer than 30 seconds, right? So HIIT training is hard, but it's so hard that you can't do it for long, right? It's like sprinting. But moderate intensity training is like turning the dial up on your motor and running that for as long as you're able to run it for. And moderate intensity training is the best of both worlds. It allows our body to use fat as a fuel source. It allows our body to use carbs as a fuel source. It increases our horsepower, so to speak, our stroke volume for our body so that we can actually maintain high levels of exercise for longer and longer. It's a very powerful way to train. You could think of this as, hey, I'm going to run 3 miles as fast as I can, or I'm going to ruck these 6 miles as fast as I'm able to. Right, that sort of thing is moderate intensity cardiovascular exercise, because it's not HIIT. You're not doing it for 30 seconds and then stopping, and it's not base. You're not like, oh, hum-de-dum, this is not so bad. I can do this for a long time. Moderate intensity is like, oh, I really don't like this. It kind of stinks, but I'm not going to stop. That's moderate intensity cardiovascular training. And you could do intervals too with moderate intensity cardio. You can do 3 minutes or 5 minutes of a hard effort before backing off of what you're doing. You can do it with a cycle bike. You can do it with a stair climber. You can do it with an elliptical. There's a bunch of different ways that you can execute moderate intensity cardiovascular training. And so these are the 3 tiers. If you're trying to work on your cardiovascular exercise, each of these should be a part of your regimen. If you haven't built a base, spend 2 to 3 days a week building your base. Spend 2 to 3 days a week over the next several weeks building your base, working in your low-intensity heart rate zones, teaching your body how to move oxygen well, teaching your tendons and ligaments to hold up to cardiovascular exercise, and then move on to moderate intensity. You can do, let's say you're doing 3 days a week of cardio. Then you have a base day, a moderate day, and another base day. That's a great way not only to build the foundation, but to start building the high-intensity house. And then after you've done that for some weeks, then you can add in that high-intensity interval training day, and you could even peak in your training to have 2 or 3 days a week of HIIT training for a short period of time. But remember, if you don't take anything else away from me today, remember, you must build the base. You must build the foundation, or you will end up injured and carb addicted. And we don't want that now, do we? Guys, this has been Alex Van Houten on Flex Friday. Please drop your questions about cardiovascular training below, and I will make sure that we can dive into the particularities of your program. Until next time, it's just 1%. You got this.
Thank you for joining us for 1% Better today. Don't forget to subscribe for the podcast. Leave us a raving review to tell others how Better Daily has helped you in your journey. If you want more Better Daily, download our app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.live. Use code POD to get 25% off your subscription. That's POD, all caps, to save 25% on your subscription. We all have a cross to carry. It's lighter when we do it together. Go to betterdaily.live today.